Let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking a piece of legislation that sits right at the intersection of property, governance, and faith. We're looking closely at the Waqf Amendment Bill 2024. Now, whether you're a policy enthusiast, a law student, or just someone trying to make sense of the recent headlines, this explainer is designed to cut right through the noise. We're going to treat this topic not just as a list of new rules, but as a complex, interconnected system, and we'll break it down completely impartially, strictly using the facts.
Just picture this for a second. Imagine trying to manage thousands of vast, sprawling estates across an entire country. We're talking about land dedicated to hospitals, schools, graveyards, and major religious sites. The central, real-world problem at the very heart of this 2024 bill is this. How exactly do you balance ancient, deeply rooted religious traditions of charity with the strict, structured demands of modern state administration? It's a massive governance challenge, and it literally impacts everything from local community rights to national economic resources.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be covering the context, the new mechanisms, implementation changes, the overall significance, community concerns, and finally, the future of the bill.
Section 1. Context. The 1995 baseline. Before we get into the new complexities, we really need to understand how things have been working up until now. Think of Waqf properties operating somewhat similarly to how properties are managed under the Indian Trusts Act of 1882. It basically comes down to two key roles. At the ground level, you have the mutawalli, that's your caretaker, the boots-on-the-ground supervisor of a specific property. Above them sits the Waqf board, headed by a chairperson and made up of legislators, scholars, and mutawallis, acting as the primary regulatory body. This was the decentralized, community-focused baseline established way back in 1995.
Section 2. Mechanisms. Defining the new rules.
Okay, let's look at the new rules, starting with a critical change revolving around the number 5. Under the proposed framework, a waqf can only be created by someone who has actively been practicing Islam for at least 5 continuous years. On top of that, they must hold actual legal ownership of the property they want to dedicate. And going forward, waqfs can only be created through a formal, executed deed. The old traditional provision of creating a waqf by user, which meant property could become a waqf simply because it was used that way for a long time, that's completely thrown out.
Next up, we have a major structural change tied to a 90-day timeline. The new bill creates a strict 90-day public notice window before any land records can be officially mutated or changed to waqf property. And it goes further than that. If a dispute pops up and goes to the newly reformed 2-member tribunal, the finality of that tribunal's decision is actually stripped away. Now, parties have a 90-day window to appeal those tribunal orders directly to the High Court. So it's a mechanism explicitly designed to create a more legally rigorous, transparent timeline.
This brings us to a really profound shift in who actually gets to sit at the decision-making table. The new bill completely overhauls the demographics of both the Central Waqf Council and the state Waqf boards. It explicitly guarantees the representation of Muslim women. Notably, it also opens the doors for non-Muslims to serve as CEOs and board members. Plus, it mandates specific representation for Shia, Sunni, Borja, and Aga Khani communities, even going as far as allowing entirely separate boards for Borjas and Aga Khanis. It's a massive broadening of the management structure.
Section 3. Implementation. Shifting the power.
Think of this next change as a monumental administrative pivot. Previously, figuring out what was or wasn't a waqf property was handled by a survey commissioner, someone who conducted local investigations and summoned community witnesses. The new bill transfers this immense survey power directly to the state's district collector. What's more, the Waqf Board's own authority to decide if a property is a waqf is entirely omitted. We're seeing a clear shift in power from traditional community-led boards straight to the state government's executive apparatus.
There's also a noticeable financial shift to look at. We're seeing a reduction down to 5% for the annual contribution that waqfs are required to pay to the board, down from the previous 7%. Now, while 2% might sound like a minor tweak when you're managing massive estates, this directly impacts the economic funding of these administrative bodies, which could potentially alter their day-to-day operational capacity.
Section 4. Significance. The government's rationale.
So, what is the core goal here? Well, from the government's perspective, this transformation is entirely about technological modernization and cleaning up governance. Their rationale is that by forcing the digitization of old records, building a central portal, and mandating centrally filed accounts, you're drastically boosting transparency. They argue this is going to protect these charitable properties from unauthorized exploitation or illegal encroachment.
It also brings in central oversight, allowing audits by the Comptroller and Auditor General. And, importantly, the bill aims to secure inheritance rights for women, making sure specific types of waqfs can't be used to deny them their rightful family inheritance.
But this brings us to a massive hidden challenge, a really delicate constitutional tension. Proponents of the bill are adamant that these amendments are absolutely not unconstitutional. They frame this purely as an upgrade in governance, arguing that it strictly focuses on administrative efficiency and property regulation, without taking away the fundamental religious freedoms protected under Articles 25 to 30 of the Indian Constitution.
Section 5. Concerns, Community, and Critic Apprehensions. Now, we have to look impartially at the other side, because critics view this shift very differently. Many argue this is a direct violation of religious autonomy, claiming it infringes on the Muslim community's constitutional right to manage its own religious affairs. There's also deep anxiety over executive overreach, specifically handing district collectors such immense power over property disputes, which critics say could lead to massive bureaucratic delays. Furthermore, some argue that placing non-Muslims on Waqf boards could undermine the cultural integrity of these bodies. Finally, a major procedural sticking point has been the perceived lack of adequate community consultation before the bill was even drafted.
Section 6. The Future. Supreme Court Review.
So where does this leave us right now? The legislative journey is definitely still ongoing. After being introduced, it was quickly referred to a joint parliamentary committee for deeper review. But you really need to note the September 2025 Supreme Court interim decision. The court actually stepped in and placed a partial stay on the act, specifically targeting provisions it called prima facie arbitrary, like allowing the fundamental nature of Waqf properties to be altered based on mere doubt. However, it was a very nuanced ruling. The court didn't free the entire law. They upheld other provisions, such as the strict mandate that only an actual legal owner can permanently dedicate their property.
All right, let's lock in our conceptual mastery here with a rapid-fire recap. If you remember nothing else from this explainer, you need to remember these 5 foundational pillars. First, the massive shift in power from local survey commissioners straight to state district collectors. Second, the strict new criteria, including the 5-year faith rule and mandatory legal ownership. Third, the heavy push for digitization and central portals to combat mismanagement. Fourth, the deep constitutional tension balancing state administrative control against religious autonomy. And fifth, the Supreme Court's active role in issuing an interim stay on certain arbitrary provisions while Parliament continues its review.
I want to leave you with one final provocative question to chew on. As modern states increasingly step in to regulate traditional religious administrations using the tools of bureaucracy and technology, we have to ask ourselves, where exactly is the line? Where does empowering a community through transparency end and encroaching on its constitutional right to autonomously practice its faith begin? It's a complex, incredibly important question that is going to define governance for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing the facts, and I'll see you in the next one.